Hi everybody, and welcome to the 46th episode of the Great Linear Song of Ice and Fire reread. We are some of the members of Vassals of Kingsgrave, and we'll be taking you through today's episode. My name is Bina007 on the forums of a podcast of Ice and Fire, which is where you can find us. And today I'm joined by Patrick.
Greetings, this is Patrick the Tall, Patrick in real life.
By Wilson.
Hi, it's Wilson, Wandering Prophet on the forums.
By Matt.
Hello, Blue Armor on the forums.
And by Sara.
Hi, Sara, DrBlood on the forums.
Thanks for joining, guys. And today we're going to be covering the events of 29th of November 299 to the 1st of December 299. So in the last episode, we ended with Arya and the Brotherhood of Banners in Arya 7 on November 24th. In this episode, it's another Arya chapter, Arya 8, and it takes place 5 days and 3 chapters later, 50 pages in my edition on November 29th. And I believe it's DrBlood, Sara, with the chapter summary.
Yep, that's me. All right. The chapter begins as the Brotherhood without Banners arrives at High Heart. Arya returns from a tour around the weirwood stumps to find Thoros gazing into the fire, but he admits that he can see nothing. Not here, not now. Thoros' reminiscence about his general failures as a Red Priest and as responsible sword owner are interrupted by Lord Beric's troubling and troubled pronouncement that, quote, fire consumes, devouring all and leaving nothing behind. 6 times, he says, is too many. That night, Arya watches as a small, pale shape creeps into the sleeping camp, recognizing it as the ghost of High Heart only when the dwarf woman joins Beric, Thoros, and Lemoncloak by the fire. She rebuffs Beric's solemn, courteous offer of a silver stag for her dreams and another for any news, instead reiterating her initial demand for wine in exchange for dreams and a kiss from Lem for her news. When Lem rudely refuses, she agrees to a song from Tom instead. Drinking deeply of the wine, she offers first the news. The wet Kraken King is dead, as she dreamed he would be, along with Hoster Tully, and Vargo Hoat waits at Harrenhal for the mountain. Then she recounts the dreams, a wolf howling in the rain, the clangor and slaughter of the Red Wedding, and Sansa's poisoned hairnet at the Purple. Then, quote, the same maid slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. Interrupting herself, the witch summons Arya from the dark, only to dissolve into terrified sobs at the presence of the wolf child, blood child, dark heart on her hill. Calmed by Beric's assurances that Arya will leave with them in the morning, the dwarf woman mocks the pink priest's inability to read the flames in a place still owned by the old gods, assuring him that Catelyn has gone to the twins for a wedding. Finally, Arya and the men withdraw as Tom begins to play, leaving the ghost to weep to the music of Jenny's song. The heavy rains that night leave several of the party ill in the morning, including Lem and Beric's squire Ned. As they ride to shelter in a nearby abandoned village, Arya converses with Ned, a boy a few years older than she, with bluish-purple eyes and hair the color of ash. Unprompted, Ned questions Arya about Jon, claiming to be his milk brother, before explaining that Jon's mother is Wyla, also Ned's wet nurse. Ned reveals that he is Edric Dayne, the Lord of Starfall, and hesitantly tells Arya of an affair between Ned Stark and his aunt, Ashera Dayne. Arya, unsettled and enraged by the implication that her father could ever have loved anyone other than her mother, rides off into the woods, only to be recovered by Harwin, who urges her to let the matter lie with the dead. Once they have settled in the stable of the long-abandoned village, Thoros has a fire vision of the Lannisters besieging Riverrun, and the possibility kicks off a series of debates over what exactly to do with Arya. Furious and feeling that the Brotherhood and Beric have once again lied about returning her to her family, Arya bolts out into the driving rain, only to find that she has run right into the hands of the Hound, Sandor Clegane. The end.
Very good.
Awesome.
Such a classic chapter, isn't it?
It is.
One of my favorites, definitely.
And why is it your favourite, Patrick? What is it that makes it stand out?
It has a good mixture of everything. It has foreboding, it has magic, it has history in it, and it has the plot twist at the end of her trying to escape, but again, ending in someone else's care, or whatever you call it when the Hound has you.
Not care.
Yeah.
But it's true. I was surprised when this one was scheduled. A lot of people were like, oh, "It's that Arya chapter," and it hadn't struck me as being like a classic chapter like the Red Wedding or one of those chapters people would want to claim. But it does seem to have really it has a good fan following. Put it that way.
It does. It's one of the chapters that I think if you reread, you get rewarded a lot because you listen to the dreams of the Lady of High Heart. Is that what she's called? The lady, the short lady?
The ghost of High Heart.
The ghost, yes. And there's a lot of information there that I don't know if anyone got that on their first read as to how important, her visions are to this book and everything that happens afterwards,
I didn't, certainly, but I got so little on my first read. That's not.
Well, not to this extent, no.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of information that doesn't make sense until after the fact happens.
Absolutely, indeed. Since our last meeting, I've done a lot of I've read the little novellas that Martin puts out with Dunk and Egg and so forth, and there's a lot of emphasis on Targaryens being able to see the future and read. So, do you think this means anything for the Ghost of High Heart? I mean, is it exclusive to Targaryens or maybe people of the old blood or the children of the forest? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, Jenny of Oldstones claimed that the Ghost of High Heart was a child of the forest, right? Wasn't that what she said when she brought her to court? Which I think characteristically seems not to be the case. I mean, she doesn't look like a child, but she may have some of that old magic.
Blood, yeah.
Yeah.
It does make sense though, because this being a High Heart, it does have ties back to the old gods. First of all, so and if magic is mutually exclusive, then yes, it would make sense that in this place, if she had some magical connection that could only be tapped into here, that she would have a connection to the old gods or the children of the forest.
Good point.
Yeah, she that's why she says Barrett can't see anything because the place belongs to the old gods and they're withered and old like she is, I think she says, but they're still there. So they're effectively canceling out the red god.
Is that a significance? I wonder. I
thought actually that in general, the Targaryens usually only dream dragon dreams, so something pertaining to their family, I guess, or dragons in general.
To that extent, it's a very limited magic, isn't it, or a sort of very limited and narcissistic vision. It's kind of interesting, which suits them as a house, I think.
Characteristically Targaryen,
yeah, exactly.
It's but there's also, I mean, I'll still have any sort of premonitions over none, I guess. It's still a useful skill.
Oh yes, if Rob had one of them, vision seeing people with him, he could have skipped that wedding. Just saying,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Saved a lot of grief, But anyway. It's good stuff.
I like how she provided a self-verification, right, where the previous visit dreams of the man on the swaying bridge and the man with the seaweed and the crow on his shoulder, right, and that's the kind of the justification for saying that Euron hired a faceless man, right? But that was a dream before, and now it's just news. And so she says he's dead. The wet Kraken King is dead, just like I dreamed he would be. And I think that's probably like the most internal verification that we have from one of these vision. I mean, you never have Patchface being like, "See, I told you,"
Oh, I told you so.
Exactly.
I know.
She seems much more kind of like professional about it, where she's like verified, confirmed.
Indeed. You think we'll see her again? We haven't seen her since this chapter and the rest of the books, right? The Ghost of High Heart.
I think if we see anything about Summerhall, she has to be. I mean, whether in a vision or in a something, but she's clearly central to that that event. So I mean, I hope. I guess.
Yeah, I hope so. I think something will come back to Summerhall at some point.
I think we don't see her again, but I think in Dance with Dragons, and I think it's, we're about to get to it, right, where Barristan tells Dany about Summerhall, so we get a reference to her, but not kind of by name, more as some sort of random woods witch that's hanging out with Jenny of Oldstones. I think the problem with Summerhall is it's a bit like Tree Brand, that once you reveal that, it's going to reveal so much, it almost doesn't end the story, but it's very hard to know how he introduces that sheer quantity of information.
But I never thought that it would be introduced, a Summerhall specifically would be introduced in the Song of Ice and Fire. I'm thinking it's exclusively for Duncan Egg.
Yeah,
I don't. Well, of course, it has a bearing on the story to some extent. I mean, it motivates the rest of the Targaryens from then on. But in to a certain extent, the more important things happen later. I mean, for this story at least, like what Lyanna and Rhaegar's feelings truly were, and who's R plus L, right?
Yes.
Stuff like that. I think that's more important. And I think if he also did a Summerhall reveal in this book, I mean, that would also take away from the Duncan Egg stories, which he plans to, at some point end with the Summerhall, as far as I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, it makes sense because that's
Yeah, it'd be disappointing to have to wait 20 years for that thing to come out.
Well, that is a part of being part of this fandom.
Touche,
I
Patrick.
suppose.
Something to get used to, yeah. Indeed.
Yes.
Speaking of magics, what do you all think? We get the Thoros backstory, don't we? And the idea that he had visions. And again, it's a bit like Mel, isn't it? Like, is there something to that? And is it R'hllor related, or does he then just kind of tag along with R'hllor? Did he have some sort of innate powers? What are your theories?
Yeah, my guess would be that it's innate and just kind of random.
Yeah, it definitely could be like you get drafted into the faith because you have some sort of inclination towards magic in some way, and that sort of you're simply just like a mage in the religious employ, essentially.
I was surprised that he was given to the temple in a very sort of traditionally, or I guess historically accurate medieval way, where he was just a spare son that they were looking to unload, and he probably, they used to do that all the time, where they would just give them to the priesthood with a generous gift to the monastery and say, he's your problem now. But I was under the impression, at least, that the Red Temple was composed primarily of slaves that they would actually purchase into their ranks, and I was surprised that he was recruited in. That's certainly the case with Mel, right? That they went shopping for her, and or at least that's the implication. And then they're all tattooed in the way that the slaves are in Volantis. And is it Volantis?
Volantis is correct.
So the idea that his was, clearly no less voluntary, or no more voluntary, but not quite as transactional, I guess, not quite as strictly enslavement. I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, well, it actually happens in the video game, the Game of Thrones video game, and I know that sort of is cringeworthy to say, but by the fact that they consulted with George on the story, makes it at least sort of credible that it was a second son or something like that decided to go to Essos and then found the faith, and then became a.
Okay, so that's canon then, because that's George approved. Is that the case?
Yes, that's the whole thing. They even added him as a maester in the game because of his involvement in the story, even though the gameplay is kind of sucky.
Interesting.
I just love that Gendry was like...
on...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think it's based on location, too. It's just that he's not... Volantis is, 5 times, 5 or 1 free man for every 5 slaves. So I think it's just Volantis that uses mostly slaves to build their ranks, whereas other free cities might not do that as much.
I'm guessing that's not the only place you go to get drafted, right? You can also go to Bravos or whatever, or
right. Presumably it was Mer. So
Mer, yeah. So they're slaves there, but they don't get branded like that.
But it does sort of suggest that at least the fire gazing can be taught, because I don't see a slave market necessarily advertising slaves with magical powers. I don't like this one can see things, and you're like, you pay extra, but maybe they would. I don't know. That actually sounds like a pretty strong selling point, but just the idea that they're buying people for whatever reason and then training them. So maybe that's why Melisandre's so crap at it, because she was recruited, sight unseen.
The book seems to insinuate that Mel is probably the best at what she does, doesn't it? Like, she's done it countless times and she's really good. So we can kind of trust her ability to see stuff.
It's the interpretation is often off.
That's the problem. Yeah.
But also the blood magics. Like I have this real theory about, does she realize the blood magics don't work, or is it like just for show, or does she think it works and she's delusional? Because the time between the leeching and when Balon actually dies is a good, like, well over a month. So either it's not her and it's just coincidence, or blood magics is slow.
I think we talked about this before, that sometimes I think she does play for the gallery. She does have skills in, seeing stuff in the fire, but does she have the ability to actually kill off kings? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't get the impression that blood magic is particularly long distance, like that it's effective at. It seems, especially comparing it to like a Meereen Mazdor or something, like it seems like you have to be very proximal to what you're doing, or even she had to go.
Where was she when Renly got? Because that's the kind of coolest example of it so far, right? The Shadow Baby.
Underneath the castle where he was.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I thought that was.
No, that's not.
Really
Oh no, that's the other one. Yeah, that's the other one.
So what was the mileage on Renly?
I don't know.
She does would have been camped a few miles.
Yeah.
She also does like 1,000 feet up in the air with variant six skins. She burns the eagle there.
I don't know. It just seems like you would have to be able, at least in eyesight, eye line or something. I don't know. It just
maybe she had binoculars.
Maybe pulled out her telescope and
a looking glass, mirrorish looking glass.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that Melisandre is the best at everything, and also I can't remember the name of the
Makoro.
Makoro, yeah. He kind of disses her, like says, yeah,
100%, yeah.
She's not like the shizness.
Whereas he's batting 1,000 at this point, isn't he? Like, isn't he really? Yeah.
Yeah,
he's definitely manipulating Victorian to be certain, but he's definitely doing. He has a better track record as of now.
Yeah. In the World League of like Westeros magics. Another thing on this chapter, I found it quite moving when Beric is sort of, just sadly, tragically saying to Thoros, fire consumes. It's clear, he's very concerned about the impact of being resurrected. And I think at the time when I read this, it was like the first time it would have been kind of sad but a throwaway. But it's a major theme, isn't it, of these books, sort of what you lose and being brought back. And it's kind of makes me think that George already had in his mind what's going to happen to Jon, or what we think is going to happen to Jon in the novels, and the toll it's going to take. But I also feel, as we build up to the Red Wedding and Stoneheart as well, he's just layering in all this thematics about what happens when you get resurrected. And it's just really sad to me and really beautifully written. But delicate, hard to notice the first time, but then it resonates the next time.
I think I took it as sad, but also almost angry that he's forced to sort of keep going, and it does, as you say. I think it definitely lays a foundation for Lady Stoneheart. But one of the big questions that this chapter I feel like serves as a pivot for is what exactly Arya is. And I know that there's a big split in the fandom as to whether she's a victim, or she's acting out of PTSD, or whether she's just a flat psycho killer at this point. And I think this chapter was really beautiful in showing that open question, because on one hand the ghost is genuinely terrified that she's even there, and she stinks of death, and she's can't even believe that she brought all this pain and suffering to High Heart. But then on the other hand, there are two moments at least where she reflects very sadly on the things that she's already done, right? Where she's conversing with Ned about whether or not he's ever killed anyone, and then she thinks over the list of deaths that she's been responsible for already, and it just makes her sad. So she is at this very kind of this liminal moment where she's, is she a monster that the ghost sees her as and is so terrified, or is she still this vulnerable girl who wonders if Jon will still call her little sister? And it's just it's very sad to see her kind of suspended in that way.
So where do you all stand on that issue? Like maybe not just Arya here, but Arya at the end of where we've read to. And I don't know if you guys want to do TWOW chapters. Are you guys all reading the Winds of Winter preview chapters or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can talk about Mercy as well. Okay. I guess you can answer those questions now or later. I think you're right, Sarah. Right now, it's all of it. It's all of the above, because she's still a little girl with regrets, and we had that last week when she's sort of saying to the little kid, "Have you ever killed anyone?" God, at his age, I'd already killed this many people. But she still has that capacity when she hates someone to think, right, I want to kill you and add you to the list, which is kind of psychopathic because it's sort of human life doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean something to me. But I kind of feel that by the time you get to Mercy, it's really gone to the point of being quite psychopathic. But then is that something that was innate with her when she was born, or is it just because of what she's experienced? I don't know. Where do you guys all stand?
It's difficult to, completely decide upon it because we don't get any, real, indication to begin with. She's lived a fairly sheltered life, even though Ned says that winter is coming and the children must grow up and stuff like that. She doesn't seem like she's been taken to beheadings and stuff like that. So we don't really know if she's like, oh well, he died because he was a traitor, or if she actually was, shocked like Bran was. So in that sense, I don't think there's a real indicator yet, but I do agree that this is like a pivotal moment, and maybe if she had been like taken to her parents by someone she trusted, or gone to hang out with Gendry and Ned and whatever, and just had a normal life from now on, she might even have chosen to veer off that path of murder and death and psychopathy. But yeah, she got snatched up by the Hound instead, and found out that her family was murdered almost a few chapters after, right?
Yeah. I feel like every sort of disappointment that she suffers, or every kind of wrenching separation that she experiences, could be seen as a kind of a resurrection, akin to what happens to Lord Beric, where she's being kind of snatched out of the life that she's expecting, or even an end, an end game that she's expecting, and thrown in this radically different direction. And I feel like every time that happens to her, very similarly to what Beric says, she loses a piece of herself, right? So that more and more she's headed in this kind of undead or Lady Stoneheart kind of direction, where all she has left is that rage.
So do you think she has? So do you think she has had 6 regenerations also?
I don't know. I would have to sit down. I mean, it'd be interesting to think about it.
The butcher's boy, Ned. Mm-hmm. Those are definitely right.
Sure.
And we have Jorn, right?
Jorn.
Yeah.
We have
the escape from Harrenhal and Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the kid on the road where they get captured by what is he called? The weedy one. Yeah, Lummy.
Oh, you mean Lami? I mean, combine that with Lauren. Like, well, no, because she experiences the tickler and all that.
Yeah. I mean, there might be 6. So yeah. It could be cool if that's actually a secret, a similarity between those two.
But she just dwells, especially at the end, right before she runs away. Like, she dwells on the repetition of the betrayal. Like, if they were my pack, they wouldn't have left me. If these guys really cared about me, they wouldn't, and being rejected by, or kind of betrayed by Harwin. And she keeps seeing these glimmers of a new life or a new possibility, and then having them torn away from her in these very violent ways. And
totally.
Yeah,
it is tragic. I was thinking, we were watching Rogue One again recently for the millionth time, and I was struck by how in the Star Wars universe there seems to be a very strong theme that if you do things that are in the same way, not respecting human life and selfish, you become mechanized or other, right? So that the most extreme example is Darth Vader, but similarly with a character of Saw Gerrera in Rogue One, who starts off as a rebel but then becomes more militant. And if you read the Expanded Universe books, you see him before he becomes the extreme character that we see in Rogue One, where he's got the breathing apparatus and he's lost a leg. This idea that the darkness physically eats up at you, I think is very powerful in that universe. And I like the idea here that it's the same, that you can come back, but you come back as other, and you lose some of your humanity, and it manifests physically. And with Beric, it's fascinating because it's memory and it's basic stuff. It's almost like it's very moving. You don't even know yourself. So yeah, I like that idea, and it was kind of interesting to me that there are other examples. I mean, Tolkien has examples of that as well, where you come back but you're alienated from yourself, and I think it's kind of the saddest alienation of all.
It seems Martin is stripping Arya of her humanity and anything Stark left in her, either by betrayal or her witnessing someone she loves getting killed, or by her killing other people herself. So each time, at first I think it was the first person she killed she was in danger, so it was self-defense or to save herself. Then later on, her killings become more maybe intentional, and jumping forward to like later on in Bravos, where she does it for no personal reason, just because it's justice when she takes the singer. Spoiling this for people, I guess. But if you look, we who've read the books now and we've seen Arya progress, it seems that each time she is moving away from Arya, the little child in Winterfell, to someone who will kill without hesitation for no reason. That's what it looks like.
Well, but I mean, ironically, though, in killing the singer, she's following the lesson that Ned taught them in, I mean, what was it, the first chapter of Game of Thrones, right? Where by executing the deserter, and that's what you do, right? So is it, and I think it's a question that comes up in your chapter too, Wilson, that what is justice when it's tied to violence? Like, which of those things is paramount in an action where you're taking another life? Like, can you ever really separate the two and say, this was totally okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also I have to just point out that, as you just pointed out, that the whole MO with Arya having an unintentional kill first and then starting to move over into kills of convenience sort of way is essentially the MO of a serial killer. Usually the first one is unintentional or accidental.
And then death becomes some kind of, I don't
another
know.
option.
Yeah, it's on the table at all times. It's It's funny because with Vok, we have obviously done our serial killer occasional podcast series, and sometimes when I read Arya, there are flashes of something that's so absolutely petrifying in the way that the Ghost of High Heart reacts to her, and you think the Ghost of High Heart must have seen a lot of stuff in her many lifetimes, so for her to have that kind of violent reaction, it's pretty impressive.
Am I the only one that every time we talk about this gets the song Psycho Killer?
No.
I think I've actually done Arya episodes either on this reread or other times with using that as the outro Talking Head song.
Sure, that's probably why then.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't think it's not an unobvious thing to come up with. Anything else on the chapter? We get some nice visions of Riverrun getting sieged up.
Yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the Danes, but before we do that, I had a question because the ghost seems to have a pretty good track record of dreaming things that are a big deal. And so I'm curious as to whether you guys had any ideas about her second vision of Sansa slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. And I think the kind of go-to interpretation of that is when she builds the snow Winterfell and Robert Arryn wrecks it and she punches him in the face or whatever. And I'm mixing it up with
trivial though, doesn't it? It seems
it
quite
does. That's
low
what,
level.
yeah. And she's like, and she also played in the backyard sometimes. Like, I don't know. It just seems very, because literally everything else that she tells them is spot on, verified in some cases for this just absolutely huge kind of game changer. And then, she's like, she also plays in the snow. I don't know.
I agree. I read that and I was reading the Tower of the Hand chapter summary and it gives the interpretation of all the dreams. And I was like, that one seems out of kilter. Why couldn't it just be something we haven't seen yet in the books? And we know George has planned some things for her ahead. Like maybe it's something completely badass.
Yes, it could be, but it is also, anyway, still quite pivotal in her story arc that she afterwards, Peter makes advances towards her. Yes, I know it's not very nice, but it's important for her because she now doesn't only see him as someone who was the friend of her mother.
Isn't that event what leads to Lysa's death as well?
Yep.
So I mean, it could be important in that sense. No, I mean the only thing is maybe she'll have a hand in actually finishing off Robin later. Like she'll have a hand in killing him later, but I don't know.
Oh, that would be sad. Be sad as hell.
Maybe she kills Tyrion after he comes back. Shay calls him the giant among men, or giant of Lannisters. So
the other one that I've heard is that Peter's actual sigil is the Titan of Bravos.
Titan,
that's
maybe good. Like maybe he's the giant, but I don't know.
That would be awesome.
Plausible,
yeah. Maybe it's just a mix up in words. Maybe the giant slayed that day.
Oh, ew. Maybe she's the one who brings down 1/1 somehow. Like that's the outside possibility.
Catapult.
Yeah, exactly.
or by a song. some sort.
Yeah, I worry for Sansa in the books. I mean, moving forward, I don't know. In the show, I think she's
No
fine.
spoilers, no spoilers, no
Sorry,
spoilers.
no spoilers, no
No
spoilers.
show, no show. Yeah.
What show? Is there a show? Yeah.
There's a show.
No, the book though, I worry where she goes with that because it seems she's moving towards. She's definitely not safe in Peter's hands, and whatever he's planning, she is a big part of it. So it might be that vision tells us how she overcomes something monumental that has put her in a really bad spot. Might be, or it might be just her killing Peter, which is equally as fantastic because that guy needs to.
Yeah, he needs a good killing. Yeah.
Like Joffrey level killing, no?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it's fine. Good
So
job.
I did want to, just because I have lingering hopes for R plus L equals something interesting. I'm not going to flog any alternative theories. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I did just want to kind of point out the ways in which her conversation with Edric really confuses that question. In ways that I still insist.
In what ways? Because I thought this was all fairly
from.
obvious, so I'm obviously missing something.
Well, so he says that they're milk brothers, which means that Wyla nursed both of them. And if we take the idea that Wyla was John's mother, and I think they're all assuming that Ned is his father, right? Because Ned tells Robert that Wyla was the name of the girl that he fathered John on, right?
Yeah.
Then what we get from his hesitation and his kind of wariness in revealing that Ashera and Ned fell in love at Harrenhal suggests that Ned fell in love with Ashera at Harrenhal, then slept with the wet nurse that was employed at their castle, had a baby with her, and Ashera is so bummed out about it that she killed herself, which doesn't take into account Beric's understanding that she had a stillbirth. It doesn't take into account Cersei's idea that Ned stole Ashera's baby, which is such a weird thing for her to say.
Yeah.
It doesn't take into account Harwin's alternative explanation that she killed herself after she lost the brother, right, which Ned killed Arthur, and then returned the sword, in which case, if any of those reasons were directly to blame for why she killed herself so that a child in her household who wasn't even born yet could lay them out, then why would they let him be Ned? Because the text really hangs a lantern on the fact that that's the same name. Arya's my dad used to be called Ned, right? But why would they name the heir of the house after that guy who made his aunt kill herself and slept with the wet nurse and just
basically the ruin of the house. Yeah
exactly, so all of those things is what I'm saying.
Indeed.
But even the internal inconsistency that he broke her heart because they had an affair at Harrenhal, but then he also had a baby with a wet nurse that had worked with the Danes for years and years, and he said oh, she's been in our service forever, and the idea that Ned of all people, for God's sake, would roll up and be hey Ashera, I'm here to hang out with you after that cool time we had at Harrenhal. Ooh, Wyla, and have a I don't know. It nags at me in ways that I can't put together because we don't have all the pieces. But anyway, that was my.
I wouldn't be surprised if Martin is trying to deliberately mislead us into doubting our R plus L equals J. I think that's straightforward enough, but all these other things will cast doubt on that theory. Ned, I don't think, has slept with anyone but Catelyn, and even that was duty. I
agree.
He's too strict for that, and John's identity will be revealed soon. But one question: the Ned Dayne, who's his dad or who's his father? Does it say?
It's Arthur and Ashera's elder brother, but he doesn't have a name. He's just he was the Lord of Starfall when Arthur was. Because the Sword of the Morning is a merit-based position, not an inherited one. So he was the younger of the sons of the Dayne house in that generation.
I see.
So his older brother was actually Lord of Starfall.
Lord of Starfall. So this young Ned who's talking to Arya, he was not alive when Ashara Dayne killed herself, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we can safely say that he is not Ned's son. So...
That's right.
Yes, we can.
He was in a
That is true.
petrified egg, and then they put him in the fire. And that's how babies work.
No, he morphed. He time
Yeah,
traveled or something.
exactly.
Something crazy that way. Oh, it's fun. Fun
Good
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that was just the
No.
monkey wrench. I felt
Good
like
to
this
do.
chapter through.
Absolutely. There's so much in this chapter. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
the
so
Ashara
good.
the Ashara timeline just doesn't line up quite well. I'm sure we'll get more about it later.
I'm sure we will.
Bloody hope so.
Yeah.
Sorry, Patrick.
And so I have in that line of thought, so doesn't that also sort of indicate that Shar isn't dead, or at least it wasn't because of Ned? Just because honoring a person maybe they appreciated that he brought back the sword, but I mean, if he still like made her or was implicit in her, taking her whole life.
And killed Arthur.
Yeah, and
Like,
killed Arthur.
Yeah.
Still, so I'm thinking that even that might not, the she killed herself might not even have been true. She might have killed herself, but I think that it still opens up the possibility that she hadn't even done that. Because the other theory of why she killed herself was because of, Brandon Stark, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that he raped her at Harrenhal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll still put the Starks in a bad light, right?
I mean, yeah.
So I'm
I
saying
would
that
think.
maybe that didn't even happen that way. And that she's off somewhere. Maybe she is some character we have seen already, but just.
The weirdest thing for me is that line from Cersei where she's like, "Oh yeah, Ashura killed herself. She was really pretty. Was it because you stole her baby?" And I'm like, what a random ass coming from Cersei, coming in the middle of a conversation about her own children. Like it comes so far out of the blue. But the idea that that's even one of the versions of the story that Ned stole some chick's baby. Like what? What is that? Like, I don't know. It's really weird.
It seems that a lot of people, or the rumor about Ned and Ashara is widespread thanks to that tourney at Harrenhal. So maybe later when she did kill herself, and I think she is dead. This is the Middle Ages. If someone disappears, they say they ran away. If there's a body, they say, they're dead. So if she jumped out the window, how would they know unless there was a dead body at the bottom of the cliff,
Yeah.
or at the bottom of her tower? So if she just vanished one day, I think people might assume she was missing. But to definitively say she killed herself, there had to have been a body with maybe no stab wounds on it.
They said she threw herself from the Pale Stone Tower into the sea.
So there might not even have been a body.
Been a body. Okay. Well,
plus, people lie.
She's a merling.
True. She swam to Bravos or wherever
Exactly.
Karth is. Yeah. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see how it goes with Danes, but we'll definitely learn what truly happened there. Hopefully by the end of book, whatever.
I think that's one of the reveals that I'm the most excited about.
Truly.
And I really hope that it's not just as simple as because there's so much to suggest and sort of very titillating details that suggest that it's as simple as, and I'm just going to be frustrated if those were all red hair. Like, it just seems like a lot of effort to go to just be like, just kidding, R plus L equals J, suckers. I don't know. But we'll see.
We'll see.
Okie dokie. Let's move on to the next chapter in the interests of time. Unless anyone has anything burning they want to say about this one.
No.
I'm good.
Alrighty. Okay, so after Ari 8, we jump to Jaime 5, which takes place a day later on November 30th, but 6 chapters, and in my edition, 90 pages later. And I believe it is Matt with the summary on this chapter.
Yeah, all right. So, fair warning, this is one of my favorite chapters of the entire series, so this might be a little long.
That's okay.
The curtain opens on the low-lit interior of a bathhouse. Steam rises from the great stone tub in the center of the room, creating a haze that blurs the light emanating from torches on the wall. A woman sits in the corner of the tub, her back to the audience, furiously scrubbing her arm and angrily muttering to herself. A man enters with a rude remark and a sly smile on his lips. Surprised, the woman poorly attempts to cover herself and hide in what is clearly transparent water. The man's smile only deepens, and he begins to undress, facing the audience without any apparent discomfort, until you see him struggling with the laces, because one of his arms ends only in the cloth-wrapped stump. A page quickly moves to assist the man, and then exits the room. With just the two of them left, the man climbs into the tub as best as he can manage, while the woman shifts to keep herself as far away from him as the tub will allow. The man quickly sinks into the steaming water, his head spinning, and the weight of his recent crippling pushing his body ever downward. Words are exchanged, or more accurately, barbs, cuts, slashes, parries, and riposts, echoing off the stone walls, reminiscent of their previous battle. Before their capture, before his loss. The man did not win that battle. He will not win this one either. The man and the woman continue to spar with insults and mockery. The Kingslayer and the Maid of Tarth. Names that are both accurate and yet completely false. Eventually the man concedes for the second time. He lowers his shield and the story begins. Jaime speaks. Brienne listens. All right, so it's tempting to like read the next 2 pages because almost every single line is important in terms of, providing us history and or revealing Jaime's character, or kind of, hinting at what is to come. So I'll do my best here. We get probably, to start the story off, we get probably one of the best descriptors of Robert in the entire series, where Robert did all he did for pride, a cunt, and a pretty face. Jaime relates the story of after Jon Connington lost the Battle of the Bells, Aerys exiled him. You get that he was the greatest threat to House Targaryen since Daemon Blackfire. Lewin Martell moves to take control of the Dornish army, while Jon Darry and Selmy rallied what was left of Connington's forces. Aerys is growing increasingly paranoid and orders caches of wildfire to be placed all around King's Landing. Pretty much every place is mentioned except the Dragon Pit. We'll see if that comes into future books. So first, Carlton Chelstead is named a new hand for a bit, but when he confronts Aerys about the wildfire, he receives a funeral pyre for his troubles. It's also important to note that Jaime was the only Kingsguard left in the city. After the Battle of Trident, Aerys ships Viserys and Rhaella, presumably pregnant with Dany, off to Dragonstone, but keeps Elia and Rhaenys and Aegon because he thought that Lewin Martell betrayed him on the Trident. And so when Jaime finds out that Aerys wants to blow up the city, he decides to stop it. There's some great lines here. The traitors want my city, but I'll give them naught but ashes. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Aerys meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all. The truth be told, I do not believe he truly expected to die. Like Aryan Brightfire before him, Aerys thought the fire would transform him. So eventually Tywin shows up, Pycelle convinces Aerys to open the gate, and then Jaime kills both Rossert and Aerys and hunts down the 2 other pyromancers, Bellis and Gargus, over the next few days. And so this is when we get the full kind of character shift and why Jaime is one of my favorite characters and why this chapter is so great.
I completely agree. This is when I realised I was in love with Jaime, is that you just get such a amazingly beautiful, rational, sensitive justification of everything he's done and the pain he feels and how he's been labelled. It's superb.
Yeah, the only reason like Arya is ahead of him for me is because she has an interesting storyline throughout all 5 books, whereas Jaime only starts here. And so do you think the noble Lord of Winterfell wanted to hear my feeble explanations? Such an honorable man. He only had to look at me to judge me guilty. And that's what I find fascinating, where as a character decision, Jaime decides, instead of to try to explain his actions, he just decides to act as the people that see him as. And so he takes on the persona of the Kingslayer, and he keeps up that facade, for years.
Do you think he's a masochist for doing that? Do you think he kind of is somehow, maybe subconsciously through guilt about what he's doing with Cersei, is kind of trying to punish himself? It's an incredibly punishing thing to do for decades, for a long time, to have the whole world hate you. Does that say something about you? I'm being called psychologist now, about you hating yourself and wanting to somehow externalize that or validate that feeling?
I don't know. It just seems like he didn't want to put in the effort to really try and defend himself. It was just an easier choice.
He's definitely the Batman of this story, right?
One of the things we talked about with Tywin being just Tywin, really, was that he was so terrified of being laughed at. And I think that for Jaime, growing up in that environment where being mocked or being laughed at was the worst possible thing you could imagine, to try and explain yourself and fail would be so much worse than just accepting and going along with it, and sort of making the best of it. So I think like he ironically, in some ways, he made less of a spectacle of himself by just being like, yeah, I killed him, what? You know what I mean? Like, rather than trying to kind of reveal this logic behind it, or this justification.
It's funny that Ned would have been the one to find him in the throne room. If it were Roberts, do you think he would have explained? Or if it were anyone else, do you think he would have explained? Maybe it was because it was Ned and he decided, well, I'm not explaining to this guy, screw him.
I don't know, because I think it's Well, the cold psychology thing that I was talking about, I think is part of the reason. So to me, the reason for not explaining is much more to do with Jaime than whoever's sitting in front of him. That again, I do think Ned Stark is the perfect person to make him clam up, because it's, Lannisters versus North, their supposed honor. It's every kind of hypocrisy he hates. Sorry,
I feel like
Patrick.
Robert would have just given him a high five. Like,
yeah, they say that Robert made a joke. Like, it's just like, I heard you killed the king. Like, just don't go making a habit of it.
Yeah.
Was Robert's response to it. And yeah, Ned was just kind of like the representation of just how society like views knights and all that stuff. Yeah, and as you said, the hypocrisy of it.
I feel Ned for Jaime is like everyone else in the he's an anti-establishment person, and Ned would be like every other knight, every other Kingsguard who stood by and watched the Tar King do horrific shit and didn't do anything, like the barristers of this world, so to say.
Yeah,
which is so ironic because the North doesn't have knighthood, right? Like, aren't they not?
Yeah, but they still espouse that same kind of, like, almost to an absurd degree, that sort of honor, the hand that swings, gives the sentence to swing the sword and all that. Sorry, Matt, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Yeah, that's kind of one of the main points I wanted to make about this, where despite the fact that Aerys was such a shitty king, his Kingsguard was stacked. Just some of the best in like the history of the Kingsguard. And yet, the low bar is Jon Darrion Oswell Went. Like, that's absurd. That's the low end of that Kingsguard. And yet of all of them, they did nothing, when Rickard and Brandon were burned. And so the only one that ever kind of responded to that was Jaime. And so that's just another reason why his character is fascinating to me. We should also just quickly get over the rest of the chapter, just because that's not the only thing that happens in this chapter.
We can take all the time we need on this chapter. Believe you me, Matt, I love Jaime as much as you.
Yeah. One thing though, before we move on, I'm thinking. So in the whole knightly honor, I don't think. Do you really think that the North has the same sort of honor code as a knight would have? Because I don't think that's essentially how it is. I mean, knights tend to favor open battles, but we've seen countless times with Robb that he favors the best odds in battle, and his counsel is from Northmen, Great John Umber and Roose Bolton. So I don't think it's a general thing. I think it might just be a Ned thing with the honor. Also, Brandon didn't seem to be very honorable in general.
I feel like Jaime is almost more northern than any of the other southern characters that we see, right? Where he is very pragmatic, and
he definitely chooses. Yeah, he definitely chooses to do the same as Ned does. When there's when his honor is besmirched, he chooses to clam up instead of actually, defending himself and telling the truth.
But don't you think that's kind of the irony? Like, in real life, do you ever find people who really don't get on, kind of hate each other, but actually are really similar, but they can't see it? And if you ever suggest it to them, they're like, no.
That's why they hate each other, because they're very similar,
I still think that Jaime respects Ned more than Ned respected Jaime. I mean, of course, Ned
for sure.
Yeah.
Ned respected, of course, Jaime's prowess in battle. Of course, that's undeniable. But other than that, it's definitely that Jaime wanted sort of to prove his mettle with Ned out of respect more than anything. Also, of course, annoyment about how he got free. But I think it's also kind of a if he really was as uncaring about everything, he wouldn't have gone to that extent to meet Ned in the streets of King's Landing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was also going to cheat here and use a line kind of from the next Jaime chapter, because he talks about kind of when he was knighted at Harrenhal, and then when Aerys sent him away. That was the first time he understood that it was not his skill with the sword and lance that won him the White Cloak, nor any feats of valor he performed against the Kingswood Brotherhood. Aerys had chosen him to spite his father. So like it was just one of those things where growing up, like Jaime kind of aspired to that knighthood, and it was just slowly, being Kingsguard to Aerys just slowly like beat that out of him, where he just saw that it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I think Jaime's career has been, to him anyway, a disappointment when he realizes it's not because of his prowess, or that the knights are really not as honorable as he envisioned, because they don't protect Aerys from beating his wife. And
Yeah.
yeah, so for him, maybe killing Aerys was honorable, but why sit on this secret all these years? Going back to Bina's point, he is like Ned in this case, where everything that happened at the rebellion is a secret. He keeps it a secret. I don't think he even told Cersei, or maybe he did and she doesn't mention it, but he tells Tyrion, we know that, but he keeps it a secret from everyone and endures them calling him Kingslayer, just like Ned endures everyone calling Jon his bastard, even though, the truth would exonerate them, and that's honorable in their way, where it's more important to them. I don't know. It's similar there in that case with Jaime anyway. He's a complex character.
But he's also, I mean, the choice of keeping it to himself also kind of does, does the notion of a knight a favor in a sense. I mean, everyone is shocked by his actions, and by not denying it, he's sort of taking on the cloak of villain just to, for maybe for different reasons, but it ends up being like an enforcement of what a knight should be. People start reflecting on it again, and I like that. I like that it's as I said before, it's sort of like Batman. He's not the knight that they wanted, but he's needed.
Yes, indeed, Jamie.
Okay. Anyway, let's move it on to Matt. Next bit.
The other half. All right. So then we get the kind of the dinner game between Jaime and Roose, and just it does a good job both at kind of laying out the current situation that's going on in the Riverlands. It's also really obvious in retrospect how shitty Roose is, and like that's kind of like what the dinner is. It's just like, how many things can I throw at you to show you that like Roose is a bad guy? So first we get kind of lay of the land. So Edmure has offered 1,000 dragons for Jaime's return. Rickard Karstark has offered the hand of Alice Karstark, which will come as she is an important character later. We have kind of the results of the Battle of Duskendale. Roose is now married to Fat Walda because of her dowry, and where the wedding is spreading. So people are meeting at the Twins, and Vargo Hoat will be in charge. Let's see here. So yeah, Glover and Talhart kind of lost at Duskendale. Remnants of their host are still abroad, with the mountain slaughtering the stragglers. 1,000 Karstarks are prowling the lands looking for Jaime. There's still dairymen left lordless, and Nymeria or Packer hunting, as well as Beric and the Brotherhood. And so then there's all these lines which are really fun. So Roose decides to drink neither red wine for the Lannisters or white wine for the Starks. He kind of jokes about the fall of the Karstarks. I do hope nothing ill befell Harry at Duskendale. Alice would be all the remains of Lord Rickard's progeny. Jaime finally hears about what Robb has done married to Jane, so he won the war on the battlefield but lost it in the bedchamber. We also hear about the plan for the fake Arya Stark at this time.
Yeah.
This greatly ironic line: in the North, we hold the laws of hospitality sacred still. And he calls Robb the king who lost the North. Talk about kind of people who betrayed the Lannisters in the past. There are no longer any Tarbecks or Reynes. And he's won every battle while losing the Freys, the Karstarks, Winterfell, and the North. And to top it all off, at the end of the chapter, he decides to leave Brienne to Vargo to be Ravens. And that is the chapter. Roose is a terrible person.
In summary, yes, he is.
Roose position.
It's so at this point, do you guys think, and I guess everyone who's watching has read the books, that the wedding had been planned at this point? Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's been talked about kind of in previous episodes, I think.
Well, I think it's weird that nobody seems to have raised an eyebrow that he married a Frey. Like,
exactly.
Wouldn't that have been very much beneath him? Like, I don't understand the benefits unless he was trying to help Robb out the way that Edmure was. But then, like, why not wait until I don't know? Frey had already broken the engagement with Arya, like, so he clearly wasn't interested in repairing the. I don't know. It was just a weird. He was like, "Oh, I'll take a Frey." Wait, what? Like, why?
It's actually not really beneath him, because they're actually the same level. They're like they're not they're lords, not protector of the realm or whatever.
No, but I thought the Boltons were much more like I thought they rivaled the Starks for a lot of the North's history, whereas the Freys are just kind of like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean they're up and coming house of Starks, definitely. But first of all, it doesn't really matter if you've been rivaling a house ever since you started. If you still lose every time,
that's fair.
You suck. That's what it
is.
And second of all, they have money. So in this case, it doesn't really care. He has an heir. If he gets another heir, that's fine with him. He gets a lot of money for wedding some Frey.
It just seems like the timing is really weird if he's not colluding with them. Like they're in the middle of a war. Everybody's very
it certainly is.
On edge, especially with the Freys. And he just rolls up and is like, "Hey, you have any daughters?" And he's like, "Matter of fact, I've got this big fat one. Great, I'll take her."
Someone like Littlefinger would have seen this coming, but Robb and all his honor and the Northern honor, they don't see things like this, So
right.
I think
they're also distracted.
And it's not really colluding, or it is colluding, but it's not really obvious collusion when it's still too, the Freys have not just declared themselves enemies of Robb yet. So he just married another ally's daughter, essentially.
But it gains him very little for the circumstances that are happening. So I guess I'm not saying the wedding is weird, but the timing is just very strange. If you take out, the idea of he's like, war's lonely, I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think Roose is too classy to say that. That the North doesn't probably provide that much money in taxes, and the money is good.
Roose Bolton.
There were a couple sort of almost throwaway lines in the bath scene that I thought were really interesting. One of which was when Jaime describes himself as standing as still as a corpse at the foot of the throne and just kind of watching everything happen. And that kind of reminded me of Ungregor in the later books. And then also when he calls Brienne as thick as a castle wall, which I think is a pretty clear echo of that theory that she's related to Dunk in some way.
To Dunk.
But I thought that was funny. He's like, "Are you as thick as a castle wall?" And I'm like, "Dunk was."
I did not see the connection at all. Is this a new revelation, her relationship to Dunk? Or has it been in the books all this while and we just didn't see it?
I think that the main piece of evidence is that she either takes or makes mention of, when she has a shield painted, she says, I saw
shield.
one in the armory that looked like this, and it's the oak tree and the shooting star. But she just happens to mention that she saw it at some point on Tarth, and it was in the armory, and she liked it or something. And also the fact that she's a goddamn giant.
Right.
Telling,
huge.
Yeah.
She's huge. Tremendous.
You do it better than I do, Matt.
Cool. Anything else on the chapter?
No.
Oh, wow.
It is great.
No.
I do obviously in the run up to the Red Wedding love it when Roose reminds Jaime of Guest Right, and he's like, precious little shit.
Yeah.
Although he wasn't necessarily the one that broke the Guest right?
Well, he's part of it, isn't he? Technically it's not him, it's Frey, but
he's not a host.
He's not a host. I don't know.
People still hate him for it.
Yeah, I don't think the Rat Cook will make any distinction there.
Yeah, he's a Kingslayer, at least.
At least. It was his dagger. It could have been anyone else, at the wedding, but it had to be him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
It had to be him.
That's what Boltons do. They slay Starks whenever they get the chance.
It's their vocation.
He probably requested it.
I want the specific honor of doing the deed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And Walter was probably relieved. Yeah, well, yeah, sure, you can do whatever you want. I don't have to commit to that then.
It shows he's not very clever, because actually you want to be like Tywin. You want to engineer lots of bad stuff to happen, but not have your hands sullied by them in case the winds
Absolutely.
go the other way, and then you can claim, oh well, I was coerced, it wasn't my idea. I mean, at this point,
Yeah.
he's balls deep now. He can't get out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So after what I agree with you, Matt. I think Jaime 5 is one of my all-time favorite chapters in the series. It reminds me of what a good writer George R. R. Martin is, how to conceive of characters that can be such a bait and switch when you finally realize what they're about. It's superb.
It's a good lesson in loyalty towards your vows and stuff like that.
And what do vows really mean in an unthinking medieval world? What does it mean to be honourable? What does it mean to to stand in your post? So after Jaime 5, which is my favourite character in the books, we jump to Dany 6, who's probably my least favourite character in the books, and probably the one that I think is the worst written, certainly in Dance. So this takes place on December 1st. It's only a day later, but it's 34 chapters and 460 pages later in my edition of the book. So, once again, Dany just jumping around the chronology. This is also the last Dany chapter in Swords. So if you had read this, you would have had a massive time gap before readers got to know what happened next. We're on linear episode 46. It'll be episode 55 when we pick up again with Dany. So even for us, it's going to be a long time back. But can you imagine if you were a Dany fan reading this in the original, and we think we're having, a hard time waiting for T-Wow, but then you suddenly realize Feast is going to drop and there's no Dany. You're like, what the seriously, for reals?
But honestly, who's a Dany fan, really? Right?
Nah, there are Dany fans. There are Dany fans out there.
I mean, Victorian, I can understand, and that's what we've got. So that makes sense. But Dany, who likes Dany?
Anyway, so on to Dany 6, and with the chapter summary is Wilson.
Chapter begins with Dany atop her new pyramid. It is the morning after the sack of Meereen, and in her solitude, she contemplates her role both as conqueror and as liberator. Missandei interrupts her musings with breakfast, which is duck eggs, dog sausages, and half a cup of sweetened wine, just in case anyone was wondering. While breaking her fast, she promises Missandei that she will take her home, to which Missandei responds, this one is happy to be here with you, or to stay with you. Shortly after Dany holds court, everyone's there, including the defeated Meereenese. She looks over to her counselors and advisors and wonders which of them would betray her next. After commanding that the dead in Meereen be buried, and this includes the masters who were crucified after she took the city, she receives petitions. A traitor from Qarth and an envoy from Astapor are brought before her. The Astapori claims to be an ambassador from King Cleon the Great, and he has come with an offer of alliance and marriage. Dany is dismayed, given that she left Astapor under the care of a healer, a scholar, and a priest. Learning that all three had been beheaded by this King Cleon, she despairs, whatever I do, all I make is death and horror. The traitor from Qarth asks for her leave to buy slaves. Dany learns that many of the Meereenese, who were once tutors, scribes, and bed slaves, now line the riverside begging to allow themselves to be sold as slaves. Dany is disheartened by this, but agrees, stipulating that Meereenese may only sell themselves, not their children, nor any man his wife. Finally, unable to put it off any longer, she summons Barristan Selmy and Jorah Mormont. Both had gone into the sewers during the liberation of Meereen and survived the sack. She started with Barristan, demanding to know why he abandoned Viserys in his exile and betrayed her family. Selmy responds that Viserys was only a boy, and even though Robert was a usurper, he was a good knight. Also, he confesses that even as a kid, Viserys showed signs of Targaryen's disease, like his father, the Mad King, and the reason for his disguise as a squire was to observe if Dany had the same affliction. Ruffled by the insinuation, she tells Barristan Selmy that perhaps he should serve as her fool, but his graceful response to that only makes her smile. She hands him a sword, and he swears to serve her faithfully for the rest of his days. Then comes the hard part. She turns to Jorah Mormont, demanding the truth, but his insolence makes it even harder for her to be merciful. After a tense exchange between the two, it occurs to Dany that it was Jorah who told Robert's council that she was carrying Drogo's child. Barristan, who is at that council meeting, confirms her fears, and the old bear does not deny it. Finally broken, Ser Jorah sinks to his knees begging for forgiveness, but it is too late. He confesses his love for Dany, and she sees this as her third betrayal, the one for love. She finally banishes Jorah from Meereen on pain of death, And that night, Dany ponders all that has happened in the past few days. Ser Jorah's betrayal, subsequent banishment, are heaviest on her heart. She considers the fate of Meereen, her exiled knight, her growing desire to get into bed with Dario Naharis, and the long road ahead to King's Landing. These thoughts plague her dreams, and after waking thrice from terrible nightmares, she rises and goes once again to her terrace, where she is joined by Missandei. She tells her scribe, never betray me, and never leave me. The next morning, she summons her captains and says that she will not leave Meereen to suffer the same fate as Astapor. What will you do, Khaleesi, they ask, and she responds, I will stay, rule, and be queen. That's the chapter.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Oh dear. So who here is an advocate for Dany, and who here is an advocate for her decision to stay put? Because I, for one, can tell you that when I read this chapter, I was like, wait, what? Wait, you're not going back to Westeros? Screw you, Dany.
Yes. Well, I think Martin makes it clear why she can't leave, because she does want to leave, but when the envoys come forth and say, hey, here's what happened, it weighs on her mind heavily, and she decides, I won't make the same mistake here. And I think there's a line, I didn't add this in the summary, but she says, how can I rule a whole kingdom when I can't rule a single city? And so she's going to stay in practice and then head back,
Yeah, and I do like that. I like the idea of her having enough self-awareness to see that she doesn't know how to rule, and the grim. When people that you rule are volunteering to be slaves, I mean, that's a pretty big slap in the face.
Yeah,
and I think it's a self-awareness. I guess it's what we see with Jon and Dany in Dance, isn't it? This trying to figure out how to be rulers. But all the same, there's a certain arrogance of the colonial ruler that, well, these are just my starter people, and I can make mistakes here and they can die. But when I get to Westeros, who are the real people who matter, then I won't fuck up. And I find that there's a self-awareness that goes so far with Dany and no further. And that's the real problem I have with her, is the problem I have with all Targaryens, that ultimately I find that they are a Trumpian race of people with effectively narcissistic personality disorder. Discuss.
When you are the blood of the dragon, I guess that's kind of in there as well.
Ugh.
But we don't know much of this Rhaegar guy. Rhaegar, I think, maybe was the exception, hence he's dead. But with him and with other people in the histories who try to do right, I think with them, their reigns are tumultuous, because I think it's Daeron, there was a civil war when he was elected. He was not the narcissistic Targaryen who knew how to fight and loved himself, so there was a rebellion, and a lot of people died. With Balon the Blessed, who was very kind, there were a lot of trouble. So I don't know, I can't look at Dany as narcissistic or self-loving, even though she shows signs of being very brutal, like when she crucifies the masters and says, it was just. But the fact that she struggles with that decision maybe says she's one of those rulers that won't be as self-centered as her ancestors were. And that might not be a good thing for her, because, how that ends. So I don't know. I think Dany is not straightforward. She's complex enough to be interesting. And that might either work out good for Westeros, or she might abandon it at the end and say, screw it, and burn everyone to death.
Well, it's kind of funny to me. Oh, sorry, Matt, you go.
That was me. I kind of disagree in a way that, at least, I don't think that the Targaryen sickness is a thing, like, it's not a coin. It is a thing that is there. It's the audacity, the self-entitlement of their Valyrian ancestors are there in every single one of them. I mean, even Baelor the Blessed, he has the audacity to think that he can change the whole realm and how everything was, because of his notion of what's right. And obviously he's crazy also.
Okay. You think?
Yeah. So,
but that's why I think what Jorah says is not Jorah. What Barristan says is ridiculous. Like, oh, but I've observed you now for a few months, so I know you're not mad. I was like, wait and see what happens, mate. Like, honestly, you might want to go for a longer sample size of time.
Well, not only that, but in that time, she crucified 163 random people.
Like, how fucking messed up is the stuff you saw in King's Landing that by that benchmark Dany's not mental because, yeah.
She didn't torture a cat, okay?
Yeah.
So she's better than Joffrey.
Yeah, compared to Joffrey.
Yeah. So in my I like the whole notion of her being like a typical aristocrat is also, it resonates with me. I mean, I just got a flash of Eddie Izzard's bit about colonialism, and it's like, so I now declare this part of our empire, and say, well, we lived here. This is our place. Well, do you have a flag? In this case, it's just
No flag, no
we have a
country.
flag. Do you have a flag? It's essentially the same thing. It's just, well, do you have a dragon? In this case, also she has a flag with dragons on, so doubly so.
Indeed.
I was thinking that she should have, because her regret in the crucifixion was not the actual crucifixion, but the sort of lingering death of it. And I felt like if she had just taken Drogon down and barbecued all of them, that in some very bizarre way, that could have been her showing mercy, but also an extraordinary amount of like, I feel like that would have been a really key PR, where I'm not going to let them suffer anymore, but hey, also look at my dragon. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I feel like this is a dragon's mercy or something like that. But I felt like she missed an opportunity to really kind of, except that she has like zero control over the dragons at this point, and that doesn't seem to concern her in the slightest. And I don't understand that at all. She's like, oh, look, there's Drogon. He's sitting on top of the pyramid. Hi, honey. But like, maybe...
Is it maybe because no one else has any control over them either? So that's okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't have the launch codes, as long as nobody else also has it.
I guess. I don't know, but like, how much of a threat is that really? If she's like, look at my dragon over there, like as he's flying away. They're like, yeah, and like,
munch.
Bye. I don't know. I feel like she, whatever. I feel like she missed.
I also like that, but I do like that you kind of compare two ways of dying, like which is the better one, like burning to death or slowly starving and bleeding out.
Well, I'm saying she was saying, like, she wasn't sorry that she'd killed them. She was just sorry that they smelled bad later. Like, you know what I mean? So if she had kind of combined, I don't want to say the best of both worlds because I'm getting into like Arya territory, but or Eris territory. But I just think, especially her complete lack of motivation to use the dragons and by extension to like literally have any control over them at all, just seems very like a major oversight on her part at this point.
Yeah, she needs someone to handle her PR better.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that's also a thing that I thought about. The reason why I think that it is right for her to, stay, because she needs in her arc, she needs someone to gather around her that can manage her PR better before she starts striking on Westeros. Because she's just like this upstart Targaryen with, she has dragonlings, that's fine and all, but she has like she has like a slight Khalasar and a lot of soldiers from Yunkai. She's so foreign in every single aspect of her that they would never accept her, especially not in that tumultuous time that people are already ready to fight for who's king.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, imagine if Aegon had rolled up to Westeros with Balerion, but just had him like pointing in the sky, like, I brought 3 dragons. See, there they go. And I mean, that's not scary. Like, it's a little bit disconcerting, but it's not. It's not. I'm gonna ride him and literally melt exactly what I tell him to. It's just kind of like, I don't know. I think he's up there somewhere.
Yeah, this chapter shows Dany and everyone who's reading how unprepared she is to rule Westeros, and in the end, it motivates her decision to stay, because she does say other things like, I need time for my dragons to grow. I need time to learn to rule. So it does show her, at least, that it's not time to go to Westeros. When everything goes awry, with Jorah's betrayal and all that revelation, with Meereen and the people trying to sell themselves, with news of Astapor, all these things convince her to stay around, to stick with Meereen and postpone the invasion of King's Landing. So I think that's where she goes. And with the Masters, I think you mentioned the Masters, her crucifying the Masters. I think she was struggling with the fact that it felt more like revenge because she could have had them beheaded or burned alive, but she crucified them, and 100 and I think 38, however many children they had crucified, she did that exact, she crucified that many in Meereen. So she struggles with the fact that it felt more like vengeance, but it was just because they deserved it. And I don't know if she's really the aristocrat type person because she's a foreigner. Even in Westeros, no one knows who she is. She's been running all her life. She's suffered. She's starved. So this right to her queenship is more like the hope that she has. Or that has kept her anyway through all that, suffering. It's like her one just end. And, she has to deal with the fact that her father was crazy, so she doesn't want to be like that. But then again, justice for the suffering people. I mean, with her, it's not straightforward, I think.
Definitely not. It's definitely not straightforward. I agree with you, but it is colonialism, right? She moves into an area, seeing them only as savages, and chooses to liberate them, quote unquote.
So she liberates the slaves, right? She liberates the slaves and punishes the masters. So if it was like she came and conquered all of them and then made them slaves, many times on her march from Yunkai to Astapor, the reason she moves on is because of the slaves. Jorah has been trying to get her to turn around ever since. But each time she says there are however many slaves there, that's why we need to go. So,
but isn't it shocking then when she basically allows slavery, okay, with certain limits in this chapter? I'd kind of forgotten this part. When I reread it, I was like, wow, your whole thing is anti-slavery. Your slavery has caused unintended consequences that have caused people to try and sell themselves into slavery. And the first reaction you think is, fuck it, let them go. It just struck me as really bizarre. Like, okay, I see you want to stay and rule, but surely to stay and rule is to also try and solve this problem, not allow it to happen.
Well, she doesn't have any power. She can't stop people from selling themselves, right? But she says they can't sell their children or their wives. So it's like, it's the one slap to her campaign. Like if someone wants to sell themselves, saying they can't is contrary to your idea of freedom, yeah? And I think it's one hard truth that slaps her in the face.
But we have those laws, right? When slavery was abolished, in Britain at least, I mean, it is illegal in this country to sell yourself into slavery.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I don't know about America, but it certainly is in Britain.
I would assume.
Voluntary service of slavery is legal.
I wonder if it's illegal to. Oh, I don't wonder if it's illegal to own slaves. That was very poorly phrased. I was wondering if but
I think the wording is not owning.
But if you were an American citizen and you wanted to sell yourself into slavery in a country, a hypothetical country elsewhere in the world where slavery was legal,
okay, so that's what I'm saying. Because I
would
wonder
that be allowed?
The extent that you are not allowed to own a slave, so who's going to buy you?
There you go.
That's what I'm asking. Like that nobody it's impossible because there's no ownership, not because there's no enslavement, which is like but I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that's
no one wants that.
Well, right.
I think that's the wording.
Yeah.
I mean, not everyone doesn't want. There's a few people that might be okay, but they're crazy. So that's
it's a fetish.
But yeah, I mean, to get back to the colonialism, and I think there is a merit to that, analogy. I mean, also in real history, there was different ideas of why you wanted to colonize an area. Was it for monetary gain, or was it for lands or resources, or sometimes it was for religious purposes?
Yeah.
With savages, they needed to be saved. And if there were any savage ways, they might even be punished for it without originally that being illegal in their society.
But I mean, I think to separate those distinctions is a little bit disingenuous. I mean, I think not anybody, but I think in most cases where the primary motivation was claimed to have been something like, religious reformation, that there was still an underlying, if not motivation, then certainly a benefit in terms of resources and things like that, which is exactly what she's doing here, right? Like the whole reason she went to Slaver's Bay in the first place is because she didn't have enough money or people so she's, and now she's taking a 10% cut of all of these things, but not in cloves, because what the hell is she going to do with cloves? You know, I mean, it's just there's a mercantile aspect to it, or a mercenary aspect to it, that that even she in this very noble way is kind of turning her own blind eye to.
But my point is more that that the one making the decision not always is driven by the prophet. They could be driven by a prophet, so to say, to do stuff. And then yes, of course, maybe their generals or someone else could have that specifically in mind, or they could have both of them, but they make their decision upon the greater good, so to say.
Right, but I think if they had been poor slave-owning cities, that she wouldn't have gone anywhere near them. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't even. No, I'm totally serious. Like, you know, that she would never have detoured into Slaver's Bay if they didn't have resources that she was looking to capitalize on.
But it happens to be that it's the slaves that are the resource, right?
Well, yeah. So when she got there, she was like, "Oh, this is really awful." And you're like, "Yeah, well, no crap, but now what?"
Oh.
You know what I mean? And then maybe that became a refocused idea of hers. But I really don't believe, like, if they had just been.
So you think that she went into Slaver's Bay before she's seen anything of it, with the notion that she wanted to betray them and free the slaves? Because
No,
I thought that she decided on that when she got there, and she essentially just went there to buy slaves.
I don't know. I think once she saw the opportunity to avail herself of additional resources and free the slaves, like I'm not necessarily saying she didn't care about the slaves at all, because I think she's obviously very motivated by that, but I think that she may have been somewhat less motivated to, like, continue her campaign if she wasn't also accruing measurable resources from
from her march.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
definitely. But it does speak to her motive for going to Yunkai, right? Or Astapor, right?
To get slaves, right?
Yeah, to get slaves. But if she had decided to, betray the wise masters, would she then have
the Unsullied?
Yeah, I mean,
she did. She got more slaves.
She got more slaves, but I always assumed, or I always felt like in the story, she decided to betray them there because of how poorly they treat their slaves. Not so much because she's not for slavery, but I mean, I think she was not out to change the world until she was appalled by how the world treated people like her.
Yeah.
Good point.
She also didn't have enough money to buy them all, so that was the only way to get them all.
Yeah.
But she didn't know exactly how much money and how little she could get.
Right.
They argued about this, didn't her and Jorah argued about this, where I don't know if it was her who said, "I can't buy slaves or go back to Westeros with slaves," and Jorah's like, "Well, you need someone anyway, so go." And then she goes and in the exchange decides then to burn the masters and take the slaves and free them afterwards, of course. But it's like you can't go back when Illyrio sends the ship for her. You can't go. She couldn't go back. So she decides to go on and buy the slaves, and then decides, yeah, slavery is bad. Let's save all these people and take them with us and so forth.
Also, very important thing. When she has 10,000 Unsullied, how is she going to put them on the boats, the 3 boats?
Yeah, right. Geography is
she seriously needs to march them all the way to a larger port and buy her way there.
Yeah, when she took Astapor, they had ships, didn't they? Or, I mean,
they must have done.
Yeah, if she was just, you don't think so?
Well, I don't think she's ever come across enough ships in one place,
really,
to ever fully ferret her armor. Because I think that's also the main reason she stays in Meereen. Like, she can't traveling across that road above Valyria would have been an awful decision. She would lose. It would be like the Red Waste. She would just lose too many people doing so. So she has to wait for people to come to her and offer her ships.
It's a terrible plan.
Very good plan. Yeah.
Well, obviously she'd be proactive in finding allies from here. But it's the same concept.
Day 533. Still no random offer of ship. Starting to get very disappointed.
I found a new Meereenese. I called him Friday.
Exactly.
Right. She would need to contact other free cities or whatnot.
My coconut phone has stopped working.
Oh, it's fun. Well, I think with Dany anyway, it's I'm interested to see how it ends for her altogether. But at the end of this chapter, it seems, she's never going back to Westeros. That's the feeling I got when this chapter was over. Like, she's going to stay, and then this will become her new kingdom. And then when Westeros is in really bad shape, someone would send for her and be like, hey, we kind of messed this up. If you want to come back and take it over, we'll be okay. Like after the Night King people have taken over. That's what I thought anyway when I read this.
It's hers for the taking if she can thaw it out.
Yeah, exactly. Please, here, please. And it's a dragon or two, warm things up. So.
Well preserved.
Indeed. Anyway, I like Barristan in this chapter. Barristan Selmy really shows himself up, and he's like, I knew your father. What do you want to know? And he really, it seems.
Oh, wait, nope.
Chapter. Say what?
I said, oh, wait, nope, never mind.
Such
won't
a tease,
won't tell you now. We'll wait till book 7. Sorry, can't do it now.
Anyway.
Can we just shout out to the sewer alligator, please?
Yeah.
Right?
How
awesome is that? It's just like,
But we definitely in agreement that the best Dany chapters have come and gone.
Yes.
This is the end of it. I mean, that was kind of like the one point. She seems to be much more willing to compromise in this chapter alone than in the entirety of Dance.
Yeah.
Like I actually like her practical choices of allowing people to sell themselves as slaves. Like, I mean, there's way too many people in the city as it is. You need to get rid of some anyway.
True.
And taking money for it, where it just seems she's much more willing to do this here. And then that's kind of the most frustrating part of her story in Dance, where she just refuses to budge on so many things that should be just easy compromises.
In George's sort of grand tradition of introducing an assumption as fact and then making us treat it as a fact too, I was very interested in her musings that the dragon has 3 heads. There are 2 men in the world who I can trust if I can find them. And I think just the very fact that her internal monologue assumes that it's 2 men opens in this world of writing the possibility that she is very much mistaken in that, and I that was not something that I had ever considered before. But
it's also it's also a parallel where because it was Aegon and 2 sisters, therefore he just flipped it. So now it's 1 woman and 2 men instead of 1 man and 2 women.
Yeah. But do we know that for sure though, or like is that
no?
But
that was just that's how she was viewing it, where she was comparing herself to Aegon. Therefore, she would have 2 people of the opposite sex to follow her.
It's just going to be like 3 girls.
Indeed. No men. No heir. If she survives this and these 3 dragons survive it, maybe she would be queen with 2 husbands. Maybe one from the north and, one from the south.
The Iron Islands.
Sure.
Yeah. And
the Iron Islands.
Yeah.
It's just Theon.
No
no commitments.
Oh,
no drama. Just Theon.
Boy. Good stuff.
Cool. Anything else on the chapter?
I was wondering if you guys agreed with her decision to banish Jorah. Like if that's what you would have done, or if you think
yes, just because of the way he played it. Like he just played it poorly. She had no choice at the end.
Yeah, he really set himself up for it. Just like he should have been like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
He's like, well, you forgave the old guy. And we're like,
yeah,
really? That's the best you can do.
Right? Yeah. No.
Those were his exact words. You forgave.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Really?
Yeah, he didn't lay out the proper argument.
No.
Plus that scene in Dance where Tyrion just discovers him just sleeping with whores that look like Dany is one of my I laughed out loud when I read that in the books. It's one of my favorite moments.
Really? That's one of your favorite moments of all the moments.
just for pure like humor's sake.
Okay.
Jorah messed this one up for himself, definitely.
Yeah.
So she would have pardoned him, maybe, I think. And
I
maybe,
think she definitely would have.
Yeah.
If he had been more contrite.
If he had been, yes.
Yeah,
she would have given, but he messed up, so that's his fault.
Okay.
That was his fault.
That's such a like swing and a miss for him. I mean, he knows her so well. I don't know why he would have taken that. I mean, obviously the answer is because you needed to be exiled. But like, I mean, from a character perspective, like why on earth would he have
antagonized her?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That position. Why would you try to piss her off when you know you're in trouble?
Yeah.
Makes no
But
sense.
also, does he know her that well? I mean, he keeps on pushing that he loves her, and if he knew her,
Yeah.
he would know that she's not into him and will never be.
Well, he's just a nice guy in the friend zone. It's just a matter of time before she gives up.
No nice guys finish last.
Ugh.
He is an
Nice.
awful controlling person.
Yeah.
Nice slavers finish last.
I think it's his pride and shame. Remember, he's in exile because he betrayed, or not betrayed anyway, but he broke the law in the north and sold people.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so to have that happen again because of his wandering eye, I think
Sure.
he's doubly ashamed, and maybe that's why he acted stupidly, because it was stupid. I mean, it made no sense to stand up to her. He didn't have a leg to stand on, yet
Yeah.
he antagonized her. All I can think of is shame. Or like you said, he needed to be exiled. So there you go.
Yeah.
He overestimated his position.
Yes.
And that's his biggest, mistake there, because he didn't know her. He doesn't know her completely. He doesn't know that
Exactly.
how little he actually is to her. Yes, she is he's a friend. She doesn't love him, and she never will. And she's actually, well, the moves he's done before has annoyed her and confused her, because he's more like an uncle or or a dad sort of figure.
But the
Yeah.
history of Jorah
Yeah.
is falling for girls and just trying to be possessive and not understanding them, not taking
Yeah.
the time to really understand what makes them tick, expecting
Yeah.
certain things of them. And his whole his experience with, being a slaver and then, getting some dodgy pardon. I mean, the whole thing is very, very, he's always entitled. He always thinks people will forgive him. There's a way back, that somehow he is special and he can turn it around. And the arrogance, I mean, the word I would describe him most of all is just arrogance.
It is.
And
yeah.
he's,
Mhm.
the fact that he isn't at all self-aware. And she keeps saying in her internal monologue, if only he just said he was sorry, we could do something
Yeah.
different to her. So I don't
Yeah.
think she's unreasonable. I think it's a perfectly rational response to a very, very arrogant man.
Well, I wonder
Also-
too if having Barristan as a kind of a substitute lifeline to Westeros, and indeed in some cases, the fact that he knew her grandfather and things like that, like a more valuable link back, made that decision ever so slightly easier for her. Where if she had been, by exiling Jorah, if she had been cutting herself off from the only piece of Westeros that she had, which I think is how
Yeah,
he saw
so the
himself for a long
Barristan
time.
appearing
Yes.
makes it easier to see. It makes it easier for her to make that decision. But I like to think that Dany would have the fortitude of character to get rid of him regardless, even if, but it definitely makes it easier at the margin. I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Right.
I don't think
But-
she thought about it actively, but yeah, it might have definitely had a factor in it. But I also think that the way, like, Jorah's relationships in general is more of he objectifies and puts this, he's more focused on the beauty and the looks, and sort of by that extent puts whatever is the object of his adoration onto a pedestal, and sort of just assumes things about them on that fact. I mean, he's a self-proclaimed knight and by my knowledge, there's not a lot of knights in the north, so he's one of the few people that's aspired to become a
that's
real
interesting.
knight. So in that whole thing, I think he sees himself like Sansa would in the songs. He's like the knight that slays a dragon and gets the maiden fair. He is.
He's just the bear.
Yeah.
He is just a bear. But he aspires to become more, and that's why it's really funny that when he have that whole the bear and maiden fair.
Yeah.
he thinks about it.
Yeah.
A question for you guys. I've heard you guys mention that there are no knights in the north. Is that a fact? Because there are knights, aren't there? Like Roderick is a knight, isn't he? And Bran aspires to be a knight of the Kingsguard. Like, they're aware there are knights, and
Yeah, it's just a lot
I think
less
it's just
common.
less common. Yeah.
Ah.
I think they regard it as a little bit more of a frivolity than they do in the South, where
Those
it's
decadent South runs.
yeah, like it's an expenditure, and it's a kind of a, if you act right, you don't have to call yourself anything special. I mean, it's just kind of
I
a.
see.
Right.
I think they view like a good lord or aristo or person like that as someone who holds their land, protects their people, and yes, if there's a war, is brilliant with a sword, but doesn't have like the decadent time to go around pouncing around in shiny armor fighting at people for play.
I see.
That love you sweet summer children. And there's
Also, there's Sorry.
And
Go on.
as Ned says, I think in the show, I wouldn't expose my enemies to my weaknesses just in tourney play. That's just silliness. So yeah.
Sure.
There's no presentation in the North. It's not important.
Yeah.
No, and another important thing, by honoring the old gods instead of the seven, it doesn't really make sense for them to stand vigil in the sept,
Right.
holy sept and stuff like that. So they don't really by religion or by the fact that they don't like to show off that much, like usually qualify or pursue that dream to a certain extent. They can be riders, warriors, but knights.
I
less
find
so.
that whole thing, I don't know how much sympathy you guys will have for that, because I think Jaime's right. Like when we go back to the Jaime chapter, that this whole, outward appearance doesn't matter to us is protesting too much. It's almost like the not having a pose is itself a pose. Like we're going to be deliberately austere and we take pride in that. It's almost as prideful as, I don't know, the Knight of the Flowers in his great armor. And I think that's what irks Jaime about Ned. That I'm sitting here with all these Kingsguard and these other knights who aren't really living up to their name, and it's very superficial, this honor that they have. But you also espouse a kind of, self-proclaimed superior honor, and you're sitting there sort of prejudiced and not willing to have an honest conversation with me about what just happened. I know it's not going to happen, so I won't bother. And it's kind of as bad. So yeah, I feel the North. I think when I first read the books, and you're meant to, aren't you? Because that's the way that George writes them, always from northern perspectives. You're meant to really sympathise with this and think, yeah, the North, they're just like the good, down-to-earth people who are honest and, they come a proper in this decadent South. But the more and more I read about it and think about it, the more I think it is itself a very dangerous pose and leads them into all sorts of delusions and bad choices.
They're like the emo kid who hates sports just because.
Yeah.
No, we know Sander is the emo kid that hates sports.
Yeah.
Sander is the emo kid.
I mean,
for sure.
No contest there. But yes, I think it's a religious thing, essentially, that because knighthood is kind of tied to the seven to a certain extent. I think that really just defines that if something by the seven, something that's so connected to the seven, starts rising up, I think as a person on the other side of the fence, the religious fence, you would naturally just reject it for something, that's what the weirdos do.
All right. I guess
I wanted to point out just this kind of like very passing moment, much like the sewer alligator, but that I really enjoyed when she was talking about the book of stories and songs from the Seven Kingdoms that she was reading. Just children's stories, if truth be told, too simple and fanciful to be true history. All the heroes were tall and handsome, and you could tell the traitors by their shifty eyes, yet she loved them all the same. Last night she'd been reading of the three princesses in the Red Tower locked away by the king for the crime of being beautiful. Is that the Maiden Vault? Like, is she reading like a historical account of the Maiden
sisters?
Yeah.
She's just reading the World of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, ridiculous. Like this is all too oversimplified and fantastical, and like what kind of a dumbass would be like, well, it was your 5 times great grandfather, but thanks for asking.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it does. Martin hides these things in there, I think, for our pleasure. So when we know about them, we can muse as we do. It's go ahead, sorry.
I just need to, before someone writes in the comments that it's not the great grandfather, 6 times great uncle. Oh. Just to make sure people don't flip out.
It was one of her ancestors.
Yeah. That's going to be a comment.
I know.
It's actually not though.
Oh my god.
Taylor was a bird.
Push up those glasses.
Well, actually, yeah.
Yeah. I also hate sports.
Happy days. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Cool. So, any other thoughts on the chapter?
Just related kind of to the earlier comments kind of about the setting up the 5-year gap. I just kind of wanted to like point out this is the only book in the series that doesn't end with any like life or death cliffhangers. Just thought that was an interesting aspect.
Interesting. I suppose it happens. The big event happens in the middle of the book, doesn't it, with the Red Wedding? It's kind of interesting.
But like, I mean, everyone, and yeah, you're right. Where he clearly ends this book on very specific, points where characters are kind of transitioning from one act in their story to the next, just to set up future movements. And it's just something that, since most of us came in either, around Feast for Crows or Dance, where we complain about the cliffhangers, where Game of Thrones and Clash both had a lot of cliffhangers. You just don't notice them because you were just able to move on to the next book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is less of a WTF moment, right? It's more of a, like, things have mellowed out. You feel kind of harrowed by the book and what's happened, and you're like,
right, yeah.
Oh, and now she's not going. Great.
I know.
It's like,
yeah.
So yeah, I'm guessing I might have to wait for the next book to see when she's gonna, get off her ass.
Yeah.
That's essentially how you end up. Well, okay, so what's happening next? This looks thoroughly fun.
It does. It's a lot of things happened in this book, in book 3, I think. And given the fact that he originally envisioned a trilogy, maybe this was him trying to, I don't know, it seems like a good midway point for me.
Well, it's the end of Act 1.
Act 1. Okay.
Yeah, and then Act 2 will end with the battles that will come at the beginning of Winds, and then
the Ice and Fire.
Yeah, which is why, like, Feast Dance is somewhat of a failure, where it wouldn't be as criticized if he fit that story to end on the 2 battles. It would have worked out very nicely.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think you're right in that. I mean, he did do a lot of good things that you would do in a second act, the middle act, like introducing new players that might have a big deal with the story, and introducing maybe facts about stuff that you didn't think about, but was sort of introduced in like the earlier books, but now elaborate on them or point your attention to them. So they do a lot of good things. Also keep on building on the world, expanding the world. But when nothing happens in the end,
right? Yeah,
then
you don't.
It's unsatisfying.
There's no climax, and he had to just make them up, where he had to bring forward kind of Dany meeting the Dothraki and Jon's death. He had to bring them forward in the timeline in order just to have a climax to end his book on. Even though we're skipping past a lot of things.
A ton of stuff, yeah. Good stuff.
Good. Well, I think this has been a really great discussion of 3 really good chapters, I feel. I mean, it's a nice pairing.
Well, 2 really good chapters and a panel cleanser.
Although I did appreciate what you talked about with the sort of the linear order, bringing up themes that we wouldn't have noticed or threads that we wouldn't have noticed otherwise. I thought that the Dany chapter tied in really nicely with Arya, as far as that question of justice versus violence, and how much violence stops being justice and just starts being slaughter, and then also the question of loneliness, right, where Dany has that whole kind of retrospective at the beginning about how she feels divine, but with divinity comes incredible loneliness. And,
do all gods feel so lonely?
Yeah, I thought that was really beautiful and really sad, and I think that all the characters we see gathering power, especially from an initial perspective of weakness, are facing a similar kind of question, right? Where like Arya feels most vulnerable whenever she relies on other people to, and she thinks of Gendry as her pack, and then he betrays her. She thinks of, her family as her pack, and they've left her. She's lost them, and the more self-sufficient she becomes, the more powerful she becomes, but also the more isolated and the more kind of tragically cut off from whatever humanity she might be yearning for. Anyway, so
I will be really disappointed if Missandei ends up being the third betrayal for love.
Oh, that would be too much.
I know
it's
like common theory.
Do you?
Yeah.
She's like 8.
Yeah.
Well, if I may lend credence to that speculation, in Dance, I think. Can we do this? Can we talk about Dance or no?
Yeah, for sure.
We do full, yeah.
We do pull. Well, in Dance, her brother is among the captives with the Yunkai, isn't he? So maybe to save his life. Am I mistaken here? Maybe to save his life, he might betray Dany. I don't know.
Right, but it's also not likely to happen until in later books, just because she seems to have kind of when Quay sets up the different prophecies of 3, the one always occurred in Act 1, and then the second of them all occurred in Act 2. And so it's likely not going to happen until like later down the line in book
So-
7 or so when we see like the third option in each of those pattern of 3 prophecies that she made.
That would make narrative sense at least.
Right.
But yeah.
All right. Well, it's another nightmare to look forward to, you know? So that
Oh,
would
dear.
break me truly if that little girl can be put in such a position.
I just picture an army of butterflies attacking Drogon.
Oh,
The wrath of the Nathi.
that would be so good.
She takes over Varys' little birds
Yeah.
and leads them to victory.
Oh my god.
Nice. Okay.
How
well,
old is Missandei in the books? If I may ask.
7. Or
She's
something.
really, really young.
She's
Yeah.
a child. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably like Arya's age.
Okay. All right.
I'm Googling it now. Someone will write in.
Okay.
How old is Missandei in the book?
I mean, I ignore all the ages anyway, just because I think it's easier to accept the story if you just imagine the children as being older than they are.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Also because Martin said he made a mistake in making them too young.
Well, yeah,
I-
that gets us to the 5-year gap, and then that gets us to the
Yeah,
Vulcan
maybe,
War.
but I still feel it's a very poignant thing to think about whenever an action happens to one of these kids, that it doesn't actually feel that anachronistic.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
Apparently, she's
Uh,
10 at the start of A Storm of Swords.
Uh,
So around the same age as Arya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Maybe
Well, on
she was
that
part of
slightly troubling note, we can wrap up this episode. I want to let the listeners or the listener know at this point. I'm not sure how many people are still following along at home. But if you are, the next episode is going to cover Jon 3, Jon 4, and Jaime 6. So basically, it's Jon scaling the wall. It's all about Jon. And then we get the rescue of Brienne, which is obviously badass next episode. So that's kind of a cool combo for all the Jon fans out there. Tanya. In the meantime, if you want to keep up with what's going on in the world of VOC, you can see what we're up to on the forums of a podcast of Ice and Fire, or you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or if you just search for VOK Podcast or Vassals of Kingsgrave, you're sure to find us. So my name has been Bina007. I want to thank my co-hosts Patrick, Sarah, Matt, and Wilson. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bina.
you.
Thanks.
And look forward to speaking to you again soon. And also for the run up to VOC 400 and the Red Wedding, we're entering some interesting times.
We are.
Yes, I'm looking forward.
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to not editing this one.
Cool. Okay. Well, have a great rest of the weekend, guys, and thanks for joining.
Bye. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bina. Bye.